Welcome to Dojo Talks. Today we are going to be discussing the World Championship cycle. We're right in the middle of the FIDE Grand Swiss, just finished round 8. Maybe we'll discuss the current qualification cycle as well. But first, let me throw it to David, because David, you wrote a blog in recent months about your thoughts on the World Championship cycle, and you've clearly spent a lot of time thinking about it. So, why don't you let people know what is your beef here?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, you're right. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And honestly, Kostya, I am quite confident about my suggestion for what would make a good world championship cycle. As Jesse can attest to, my ideas are often not as great as I think they are. But I'm pretty confident about this one. I think this one would be sweet. I think it would, be appreciated by most chess fans, increase viewership and all that. So I feel good about this one. So as I outlined in my piece, there are two major problems with the World Championship cycle right now. One of them is that the qualification process is kind of like random and scattered and controversial. And I don't know if every single option ever would be controversial if that's just a given. But to me, when I see how much controversy there is, it's like a sign that something's not right. Like I, on my own, already thought something was wrong with it. But when you see like a lot of controversy about it, for me, it suggests some confirmation. And then the second thing that's wrong with it is that a lot of people think that the actual world championship is boring. And I know that might be a horrifying claim for some people. Maybe Jesse's like horrified and is like, whatever, if somebody thinks it's boring, they can, watch Pinochle instead. And, it's good for real chess players. But I would say when you've got a huge percentage of people claiming that it's boring, and many of them self-identify as chess fans, that's another big problem. So millions of draws are part of why it's boring. Or actually, I should say just a dozen, right? Because it's not enough games either. So I won't call it millions of draws. It's like a dozen draws, and that's like not at all enough. This year they're raising it to 14 games. I always thought that the World Championship should be epic. Epic. Like it should be so exciting, should be so thrilling. It should be, this incredible clash. And to me, the Kasparov-Karpov matches were epic. I loved them. And of course, that's the imprint that I got as I entered the chess world. And somebody who enters at a different time is probably going to think whatever's going on at that time was really exciting. And then that's going to shape what they think would be like great chess competitions in the future as well, right? So if somebody became a fan of chess during the 1948 World Championship tournament that Botvinnik won, is that when he won the World Championship, Jesse?
When he won it as a tournament, yeah.
Yeah. Was that 48? I think, well,
that sounds right. Yeah.
That does
about
sound
like
right.
that, right? So somebody who like got into chess, between 1945 and 1950 would probably think like, oh, what we need is like, this kind of like massive tournament. That's really where it's at. Nothing else can compete with that. So I was really shaped by my positive experience of the Kasparov-Karpov matches. Mm-hmm. So there's that element. I think that 12 games is way too short. I think that you need to see some decisive games. My understanding is that like complaints about some of the previous World Championship cycles that I liked is like, oh, they're hard to like schedule. They go on too long. It's hard to like get a venue or something, which I think is all kind of like silly. I think there's enough interest and excitement about chess that you could have a venue available for it. Other sports use these gigantic stadiums. For chess, you need like a table, 2 chairs, a chessboard. Like you don't need to rent some crazy place to have an incredible game. They could play in that janitor's closet from the Queen's Gambit. You could rent that. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
So that's my feeling about like that's just vaguely my feeling about what's wrong now and what you need. Um, One of the other a couple major innovations of my cycle are number one, the final would be kind of like a hybrid of a match and a tournament. So I think the world championship, like it doesn't necessarily need to be a match, nor does it necessarily need to be a tournament. And I think there are people who are better in matches and better in tournaments. And I think a hybrid match tournament would be awesome. So I think a 4-player tournament where they play each other about 8 times each would make for a pretty good world championship. I'd be open to them playing each other, 10 times each instead of 8 times each. But the idea is you don't have any like super outliers that someone can rack up a score against while, losing to their nearest rival. But you also have a little variety. It's not just a matchup between 2 players that determines it, where one player just happens to have a favorable matchup against one other player. So that's one innovation. Then my other innovation is sort of like democratizing the qualification part of it, just opening it up to basically, I think I put in my article, like anyone over 2,600 FIDE would basically have like a shot to compete in the initial qualification phases if they wanted to. So, I guess this like Grand Swiss has 2 spots, but I don't like how FIDE has like 7 different avenues that each have 1 spot, because then each spot is kind of random. So I would have sort of like a lengthier Grand Prix cycle that was inclusive. Instead of having people qualify to a Grand Prix cycle or get invited to a Grand Prix cycle, it would be 2,600 and up. Everybody would have a chance, play a lot of massive tournaments that would be really exciting, and score points over a season towards, qualifying for the candidates.
Okay, well, a lot to get into here. We have David's proposal. We linked it in the chat. We'll link it again, and then we'll include it in the show notes and the description wherever you're hearing this, so you can read over the full thing. But maybe we could just get like some really basic points down. So how long does the whole cycle take?
So it would be to run a world championship every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Would be my cycle. There's several months extra in my cycle. Like if you were just trying to rush through it, you could probably do it in like a year and a half. But there's a little space for people to breathe and play other events and so forth, right? Or prepare between matches. It's fine to let the world championship cycle breathe. I'm not like in a rush for it to happen. So it comfortably fits into 2 years without leaving the players no time for other competitions.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with you on a lot of stuff that seems wrong about the current cycle, especially that like the qualification does seem fairly random. Like they just change it every year just based on whatever they want to do. Like 2 spots to the FIDE Grand Prix, 2 spots FIDE Grand Swiss, 2 spots World Cup, wild card, no wild card, 2 spots by rating, 1 spot by rating, 0 spots by rating. It's just like, and then, yeah, it's just this very long process. Then you get to the match, and then the match is like very different actually to what most tournaments are like as well. It's like most players are getting to the top by playing tournaments, either opens or round robins, but they have to face a variety of players. They have to score a lot of points. They have to win a lot of games. Then you get to the match, and it's like, oh, 1 win is enough to win. 2 wins is enough. Like you're done. Like once you get 2 wins in a match. So
you might be playing the first match of your life, and Carlsen's played 5, and you don't even know what it's like to be in a match.
Yeah, it's like this totally different format. And yeah, I mean, Magnus, he seemed very nervous for his first match, and like the first couple of games, it wasn't clear he was even a favorite, even though by rating he was, I think, a very serious favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jesse, how do you feel about the whole World Championship in general?
Well, first, I want to say the point of David's that I agree with is you can't be mixing rapid chess and classical chess in the World Championship. And there's a couple of reasons for this. But first, we got to say it's mixed in 2 ways. One, of course, is there is a rapid tie break after 12 games or however much they decide. Like David says, there's not a consistency in the format. And then also in stuff like the Swiss, to determine 2 of the spots, those go to rapids as well, often as tiebreaks. In fact, there's no way you can win that tournament without having gone through several rapid tiebreaks, right? It's just set up that way. So that, I think, feels wrong for every fan out there. The rapid is conflated with the classical chess. Now, for my own, other than that, I guess I want to stress as somebody, I don't know, a fan of the game, that I think one of the reasons this is a cool thing is because of tradition. The World Championship match, to my mind, goes back to McDonald, the match between McDonald and Labourdonnais. That was not an official, they did not brand that back then as officially as a World Championship. That gets into the later 1800s where that happens officially. But to my mind, that's a clear thing that happened in history that set a precedent that fans got excited for. And when I think about world champions, it is definitely match-based. Mm-hmm. And the only reason the Botvinnik situation happened as a tournament was because that was post-World War II, and there was no clear way of saying who the current world champion was, because Alekhine, or as Kostya likes to say, Alyoshin, was dead, right? So that was the problem historically that happened there, that they had to create something out of thin air to reboot the chess world after World War II. But that was the only reason, and otherwise it's always been a match. So
San Luis.
To me, the reason that you have matches has a lot to do with history. And the reason you don't have rapids is because of history. And someone in the chat said, well, why don't you do a grand slam like they do in tennis? Because there is no world champion in tennis. That isn't even a thing for the tennis players. Why is there a world champion in chess? Well, it's historical, it's tradition. It's that's the way things were done. And also from a historical perspective, what I felt was by far the best system was what we had when I was a kid, where you could qualify for certain spots by winning the interzonal. And it was a cool thing. If you won, let's say, the US championship, then you got to go to the interzonal and play in the interzonal. And then that was a tournament. Then if you did well in that tournament, you could qualify for the playoffs, which were matches. And those matches were great. And there was one reason those matches failed, as far as I can tell, and that has to do with money. There wasn't a lot of money out there, especially because when the Soviets were playing, they weren't really playing for money. So there was no one demanding money. There was no Soviet sponsors for big time money. And those guys were getting their own money from the state anyway. I think that would be a lot different now. When you look back too, you think about Fischer playing Larson. They're playing I think in Denver in some basement, It was it's really low stakes. And Fischer obviously had a problem with it, but he was going for it, obviously going for the world title. And, that was a beautiful system. Those matches were amazing, amazing. And you want to say you get to the world championship and you never played a match? Well, maybe you should have had qualifying matches to get to play Carlsen in the first place.
Yeah, I like those matches too, Jesse. And I think it's a shame. And that's one of the things I was referring to, that I think that the argument against some of these things is oh, we don't have the money to pay for a venue. We don't know when the event will be over. It's scheduling problems. I feel like that may have been why they don't have those matches where you have to win a certain number of games anymore. And I think those were beautiful matches.
Mm-hmm. The other paradoxical thing I want to say as a fan, though, is I still enjoy the World Championship a lot. I'm really looking forward to this one, even if I don't like the way it's determined. I definitely want to say as well, I don't like the wild card thing. I think that just smacks of the corruption that's going to happen. It just invites it. Even if the corruption isn't there, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look right when I was going to say the Soviets, but the Russians get to choose somebody because they're hosting it. It just doesn't look right. But on the subject of corruption, it's got to be said that FIDE has always been a corrupt institution. And I think one of the main reasons for that is, in order to win the presidency, it's a one nation, one vote thing. So you have to pay off all the small say African states, but states that don't have any or hardly any chess going on anyway. You got to pay them off in order to win the presidency. So it already sets up a corrupt precedent for that. But the thing I want to get on with the corruption, this is just intellectually interesting thing to me. There are two events that I'm into as a fan: the World Cup in soccer and the World Championship match in chess, both run by incredibly corrupt institutions. So it's just interesting that these corrupt institutions, I'm like, yes, they're amazingly corrupt, but still, wow, Jesse's really into these two events. So it's kind of an interesting thing in itself. But nevertheless, I think it's important, even if it's a corrupt institution, we have this discussion. And I definitely think you need to play those interzonals were great, and those matches back in the day were fantastic to see who could, challenge for the crown. And you look at who Fischer had to go through, who Kasparov had to go through. All these matches that led up to the big fight were great, memorable things. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. I have a lot of correspondence with David. I think maybe the issue where we really differ is the value of tradition in what the World Championship means. For example, David writes that maybe Chess 960 might be cool. Maybe it would be, and maybe they should have their own tournament. But why do we do it as classical? Because it's a thing that's been going on for hundreds of years. That's why. And it's a cool thing. Like the World Championship, that title means something. There's an aura about it. And yeah, it's cool. And I hope it's something that's continues to be respected and be a thing.
Yeah. For me, that's the sad thing. It's that it's like a very nice tradition that we've had in the chess world with the World Championship matches. But yeah, personally, I'd be happy to give you guys my feeling for what I think it should be. I would do away with the classic matches, and I would just call Magnus, the last classical world champion, and just switch over to a completely new system.
Oh no. Oh no, Kostya.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Well, what's your system?
Well, here's my issue. I mean, like, what's the point of the world championship match, right? It's probably hopefully to determine the best chess player in the world. And then what's the point of having a number one ranked player by rating?
There's another reason to it, Kostya.
The same thing.
There's another reason. It's true. We have the rating list. The second reason for having the World Championship is to force the top couple players in the world to fight it out in one particular competition, to give their everything against the other couple very best players.
Yeah.
And see what comes out of that intense competition. So it's not just to find out who wins after the competition. We already know it's Carlsen, right? It's to actually have that competition and watch it.
Well, look, I think you could still have a world championship. I just think there's many sports where the Olympics is much more important than the yearly world championship, right? They have a world championship in nearly every sport, right? But the Olympics for a lot of these events that's the real thing. That's what they're fighting for.
Probably just because they're corrupt as well, so they've got Jesse watching them.
No, I don't know. I mean, I think in tennis, for example, right, you just have the rankings, and I think in chess you could do a very similar thing where it's you just have the ratings, and that's how we determine who the best players are. You could still do a yearly world championship tournament, like a World Cup or a series of candidate matches between the top 8 players or whatever. You can still make that a yearly thing, and it would still be very exciting to watch, and you would still have a yearly world champion. But I would just think to me, it's very devalued when it's the number one player is different than whoever wins the world championship, which has been the case for several times throughout history. You had a world champion, and then you had a clear number one player, and it's not the same person, and then it's very, very confusing. The other system that I think actually makes a lot of sense for chess would be similar to one in boxing, where you have someone with the title, and you have to beat them to take the title away from them, kind of like it is in chess. And they might not necessarily be the best boxer in the world. Someone could be, quote, sitting on the title, but they can be challenged more than once per year. It's not this like super long drawn out cycle where they can only be challenged like every like 3 years. Rather, they can be challenged multiple times a year. I don't know. There could be some system where like, yeah, as long as you're the number 1 or number 2 rated player in the world, you have a right to challenge the current world champion and try to take the title away from them. But I don't know. My feeling is just that it doesn't really make sense that we have a rating system and then we have like a multiple year cycle for the world champion. It's like I don't know. I think it's just too long and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me overall.
Oh man, Kostya, that was the most depressing diatribe I've ever heard, my friend.
Yeah, I don't even know how
terrible.
to explain to him why there's like a point to it. I mean,
yeah, I mean, think about, for one, just think about all the less than a month we're going to start this party, and it's going to be blows, man. It's going to be great. Even if it is a bunch of draws, it's still going to be great. We're going to have the world's attention on it, and honestly, Magnus might lose. There's a chance. I give him an 8% chance of losing. It's possible. He might lose.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And out to the point of like the number 1 being different. I think Petrosian, we can argue, was not number 1 at the time he was world champion. Other than that, it's kind of hard to pinpoint sometimes in which the world champion was not number 1. It's rare. It's actually very rare.
For me, one match, I don't know, that was super disappointing, I think was 2012, Anand Gelfand, where Carlsen was, I think, number 1 rated player in the world, drops out of the world championship cycle because it's like he doesn't like the format. And then the whole cycle and the world championship match is without the best player in the world. With all due respect to Anand and Gelfand, like, they're amazing players, but to me it was just like I don't understand the point. As much as I really enjoy the matches when they're between the like number 1, like Carlsen Caruana for me was just an incredible match. I really, really loved following it. But it has to be like a clear number 1 and number 2 for me to like truly be interested. When it's like number 1 versus number 6 who happen to qualify, or like number 3 versus number 8 for the world championship, that doesn't make any sense to me.
But that, Kostya, is not because the world championship couldn't be a good thing. That's because FIDE messed it up. They used the stupid cycle. The best player in the world wasn't interested in their cycle. They didn't change their cycle to like include Carlsen. They didn't talk to any of the top players ever to pick their cycle. They just always just say, this is what it is. We got no idea what we're doing, but we're in charge of what it is. If you had my cycle, I bet you Carlsen would have been in there and you would have had fun watching that world championship.
But I think that's just the issue with having like a long drawn out cycle in any form. It's just like there's always going to be players that are unhappy about it. It's always going to be somewhat arbitrary, which is why for me it makes sense to just do like a world championship every single year. If one year it gets scuffed, whatever, next year is right around the corner. Like, it's not a big deal. But like these 3-year cycles where they get messed up because like the best player didn't want to play, or like, you know, the candidates tournament gets split in half by a pandemic, right, and totally like replaces one of the players. It's just, I don't know. It's
okay, but maybe I just want to do a little history here. So what I see happening there was, let's just say it has everything, that situation, Anand Gelfand, you got to take it back. Why did it happen? It was because Kasparov was pissed in the early 90s that they weren't giving him enough money to play the world championship match. Now, maybe he had a right to be pissed. And then Short was the enabler, because then he was like, yeah, I'll ditch the match with Karpov to play you. And then that's how it happened. And then it took all of this time with FIDE just spinning its wheels, doing ridiculous stuff, to now come back to a system that is at least a semblance of what it was before Kasparov and Short ruined it. Right? That's what it's like. It's now we lost the matches as a qualifier through Kasparov and Short. And there was a legitimate question that Kasparov had, is like, why isn't there more money involved? And he wanted more money. And yes, we can argue about it at length, but that whole process finally worked itself out. We are now unified. The structure isn't perfect. I do not like the candidates match candidates tournament to decide who gets to play Carlsen. But at least it's something, at least it's something. And at least finally we're back on a unified world title. I mean, that, praise be, that whole thing that FIDE had going on from Karpov being champion, whatever it was, 94, when then they did their ridiculous like Grand Swiss to decide who's world champion. Terrible. And by the way, I love Ponomarev, I love Kazimjanov, but those guys are not world champions. I'm sorry, they are not. And Anand, when he won in 1998 or whatever it was, no, that doesn't count. I have a list of the world champions. It's important to me. It's important to me, like when we do the list, like who we say is world champions, those guys were not world champions. And part of the reason this is important, you know, for me, of like, I'm not going to scuff the world championship title is, yeah, there's history. There's history. And in general, like if you're world number one, you have to prove yourself. You have to, it's not just by being the highest rated. No, you have to prove yourself in a match. And it's
real quick, Jesse.
Yeah.
There was one other like tournament for the world championship title that comes to my mind, which was San Luis in 2005, a double round robin, which was.
But I think that was before it was unified.
Which was won by Topalov.
Yeah.
What do you think of his world championship status?
That doesn't count. And then they had the supposed unification with Kramnik and Topalov after that, right?
Okay. So Kramnik was the real world champion that whole time and remained the real world champion.
Yeah. I mean, Kramnik dethrones Kasparov in 2000. What was it?
2000.
Whatever it was. And then Kramnik is the world champion until he gets dethroned. Yeah, that's my list.
No, I'm 100%. Yeah, I agree with Jesse. It's like a Game of Thrones thing. But yeah, no, I've always liked the system of having to dethrone the previous champion. So it was Kasparov, then Kramnik, and then, yeah, with all due respect to Topalov, amazing player, he lost 2 matches. He lost one to Kramnik, he lost one to Anand. He was never, in my opinion, the classical world champion. Although at one point he was the number 1 rated player.
I could be convinced to put the world champion into the final 4 in my event, but you know,
why can't we just have it like the world? What's so wrong with it as it is? Someone has to dethrone Carlsen.
So put him in the 4-player tournament. I just think my 4-player tournament would be much more interesting than a 2-player match.
No, I want it to be real. Here's a thing that Chess Numbers, who's in the chat, he pointed out to me that I really like. You want to take down Carlsen, and let's imagine that Nepo is 80 points worse, 80 ELO points worse than Carlsen. You could choose 100 if you want, but let's just say 80. That's being charitable, I think, to Nepo. And then you say, well, with one game, he has obviously a chance. It's worse than 50%. But when you take it to 12 games, well, the amazing thing that Chess Numbers said was it turns into like an 8% chance. And I'm like, oh, that seems more fair. You want to put it to 14 games, it goes every game it gets a little harder for Nepo. So it's like very true system for deciding who is best. And I love the stress of the event too, man. Wow, what an amazing deal. Caruana gave a interview recently on it, and just suddenly being thrown in the limelight and being like, holy moly, this is a different deal, man. This is a totally different event than any chump tournament I've played in my life. Fantastic. That's what it's about. That's the history of this event. It is not your normal chump tournament. It is the real thing.
Yeah, but then
the number.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, okay, I was going to say, well, Jesse was just talking about the number of games. It's a very important point. The more games, the more likely you are to have the real like winner, right? And one of the big problems with FIDE was shortening the number of games in the World Championship cycle. In the World Championship match, it used to be 24, and then they brought it down to 12. It needs to be more games so that you've got like a chance for the match to develop and to have like different chapters. So anyway, go on, Kostya.
Well, yeah, the other thing, it's like, I agree with Jesse. Like the classical world championship match is like this huge deal, like clash of personalities. I don't know. I just think it's kind of a shame when it's not the number 1 versus the number 2 player in the world. And with the candidates tournament, I think multiple times have gotten not the number 2 player in the world challenging for the world championship match. Like we've lost a lot of years, right? Again, with all due respect to every single player out there, like I think Caruana was a clear number 2 when he challenged Carlsen.
Mm-hmm.
And other than that, I think Magnus was a clear number 1 when he challenged Vichy. But like none of the other matches I felt were between the clear number 1, clear number 2 player in the world at the time.
Well, that's why you're making my point. There needs to be matches as a qualification.
Right.
I'd be cool with the
system
matches.
is so dumb.
I'd be cool with the matches, yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's like if it's going to be a 2-3 year cycle, and then you don't even get the second best player in the world coming out of the cycle, then yeah, that's an issue. But if it was matches, then they could really prove it.
Yeah. Their cycle is so long and expensive, right? Without even producing a semblance of like a big chance of winning. Like I've had like really strong players tell me about that, and they say basically to be like the candidate at the end who plays Carlsen is kind of like winning the lottery multiple times. Like no matter how, like you can be 2750, 2780, 2795. It's still kind of like Nepo won the lottery. Like it's not like he was just so much better than anybody else over any considerable period of time.
Yeah. No, I mean, right. He did really well in like this tournament and like previous tournaments, but yeah, it certainly, it doesn't seem like such a conclusive thing like we would all like it to be. So yeah, for me, it like either it's super conclusive or, just say it's the old system, it's the classical system. Carlsen's the last classical world champion, and we switch over to a more modern system where it takes a year, or there's like a yearly tournament. But really, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure how people feel about it, but for me, it's like that whoever is the number 1 player in the world is much more important than who holds the title based on whatever system or cycle has just happened.
Oh, I so disagree, man.
For me, that's because the system is all messed up right now.
I would say the system is mildly flawed. Okay, the system has some mild flaws, but ultimately it's still better than what much better than what Kostya is saying. Oh my gosh, I can't believe the heresy thing.
If we talk about when Petrosian was world champion, for example, right, or when Botvinnik was playing matches with Tal or Smyslov or somebody, like there may be some point there, Kostya, where the number 2 or number 3 player in the world by rating was the world champion, and they were the world champion to me, and that matters to me. I think that's great.
Yeah.
No, I mean, look, if the number 3 player beats like the world champion, who was the number 1 player right earlier, then yeah, they totally deserve the title. That's totally fine. Yeah. No, to me that's always made sense. If you beat the world champion in a match, like you're the new world champion. But yeah, I don't think these players are shifting in level so quickly that like they beat the world champion, then the next year they're like number 10 in the world, number 5 in the world. Like I think they're still staying up there. But also there wasn't even ratings back then, so it's hard to.
So Kostya, Jesse, neither of you would want to see like Carlsen, Ding, Caruana, Firouzja play each of each other like 8 times.
No, we've already seen. I see those guys. I see those guys playing all the time together. They play in tournaments all the time. No,
they play one game at a time in a tournament where somebody finishes with +2 and somebody finishes with +1, and they make like 8 draws.
No, we have a world championship thing. It's a real thing. It goes back. Think about it. Capablanca, Alekhine, all these classic matches going back. Oh man, the challenge, the atmosphere, the drama of being like. For example, people in the press don't say, "Oh, Carlsen, you're world's number 1." No, they say you're the world champion. It means something. And those chump tennis players, like you won the Grand Slam, I don't care. Are you world champion? No, I don't know what you are. I don't know what you are. That's what Kostya wants to make us into. Are you? No, I don't want any part of that. Nothing. Now, here's my suggestion. I know there's a little bit a footnote to what we're saying, but I think one of the things about the suggestion I have for the current system is bring back the matches, and then instead of a rapid tiebreak, here's my thing. I think you go to an overtime. You go to an overtime, and you can go to a second overtime, but it has to be a fixed number of games because it can't go, you can't have it so that it's not just one game, right? So like if we go overtime, it'll be 4 games each overtime, and then boom, and someone will win. Someone will win. And I love the fact that Karpov and Kasparov went so long that somebody passed out, dude, and had physical problems. Absolutely, dude. McDonald and Labordonnais, those guys were fighting so hardcore. The guys died. He died, dude. And they had so many matches and they kept playing. They died. It's a physical event. It's torture. It's not some chump tournament. The whole thing that's important to understand. And like listen to Kasparov talk about it, any of these world champions, when you get to the world championship match, it is a different thing altogether. You are on a different level. You feel differently. The games feel differently. Everything about it feels differently. And that's the beauty of it. It's not just some chump tournament. It's a special thing. All right. That's it. I promise.
No, I do like the idea of the 4-player super round robin. I think that would be fun. I don't know. I do enjoy just the personality clashes of the world championship matches. I think those have always been just incredible. Kasparov Karpov, Kasparov Kramnik. People were mentioning, by the way, that cycle also had its issues with Shirov defeating Kramnik and then not getting the match.
Big ol' asterisk on Jesse's tradition right there is Shirov. But yeah.
Well, like I said, but that was part of the thing, is that wasn't actually Fide's problem, because that was, Kasparov doing his own weird thing.
Yeah, that was Kasparov's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess some things we can agree on is that there have been issues in the past. Rapid seems like a weird way to determine the classical world championship.
Yeah, there's already a rapid world championship.
Yeah, and I
mean, no one cares about that, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I care about it. I think
they don't need it to also be the world championship, right? They can watch the rapid championship if that's what they're into.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to just have a separate rapid and blitz world championships, as they do. And I love the Triple Crown. I love that that's a thing that one can win, and then Magnus wants it. He's done it twice, I think. But it would be nice to have a better tiebreaker. What if it was just like Jesse, like you were saying, just like 2-game blocks, right? Like you just play 2-game mini matches until you have a winner, and then it might take months, but that would be epic.
Yeah,
the longer it goes, the better.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, those matches, dude. When you read about Labordonnais McDonald, it's like, right, that's the way it should be, man. And then the Steinitz matches too, man. That other guy, he was gonna win. He died too. They played in St. Louis and New York, and then they went to St. Louis, and then he basically died. Dude. He basically died. So the tradition, my friends. It's like this is like you get pushed. It's fascinating. You're gonna get pushed to a limit, And all those, even the recent ones, even though it was only 12 games. I feel like definitely Fabi and Karyakin got pushed to the limit, as did Carlsen, dude. Those were long, rough matches. Yeah, I love it, man. So no, I'm not changing anything over my dead body, Kostya.
Cool.
Okay, well, that was cool. That was a good little talk.
Yeah. I'm very disappointed in it, but at least you're smiling.
Well, folks can check out David's full blog about his proposal, and they can let us know what they think. Do you guys have any thoughts on the FIDE Grand Swiss? Or are we?
I've been enjoying it as a tournament. I've been doing some streaming every day, mostly focusing on Fabi, and one of the things actually about a world championship that's really interesting is if you lose, like Fabi did, what happens to your career in life? I think it's very hard. Like he fell out with his second, right? And now his chess is in a little bit of a crisis. And can he come back? Maybe not. Like if he has a couple more bad games, Firouzja could pass him. Firouzja could become the world number 2, like within the next couple of days, it could happen. So, there's real drama about the loser too. And so many stories about Bronstein and Korchnoi, and I think one of the things that's interesting is those guys who didn't win, and then the psychological trauma and the difficulty of living a life, without it. It's really, fascinating, dude. And somebody's in the chat was like, "Oh, Cry wants a death match," in a sense, because what happens in a tournament is, yes, there's a lot of tension between you and your opponent in a tournament, but what is that is going to end within a couple hours, and then you're going to play somebody else. In a match, oh no, there's friction right away, and it's not going anywhere. It's just you mano a mano against some dude. It's a totally different beast. I love it, man. It's like we need more of that. That's great.
Interesting. Yeah, it's crazy that, Caruana, if he doesn't qualify here, he might not get into the next candidates. So he'd have to go through like the Grand Prix.
Right.
So yeah, totally insane.
Yeah, I think as far as the Grand Swiss, is it fun to watch? Yes. I feel like a lot of the players are bringing like a very good level of intensity to this tournament, playing really hard. I don't know if that'll keep up over the last few rounds for the players who aren't in the running for those 2 spots. I think as part of like a championship cycle, it's sort of like silly / stupid to have these events with like 1 or 2 spots, because I know the intensity is awesome when everybody's like gunning for the world championship, but then after like 2 or 3 rounds, it's like a tournament and you're out of the running. And then after 6 rounds, almost everybody's out of the running. So I think that may start like dropping off, but I've only been looking at like the top board games and Dubov's games. So I don't know what it's looking like on board 10 and 20 at this point in the tournament. Right. So Jesse's following Fabi. I'm following, Firouzja and whoever's on board 2 or 3 every day.
Well, I'll tell you guys what, tomorrow I'm going to be streaming early, and it's going to be Fabi against Firouzja tomorrow. That's confirmed. We have a confirmation on that. So beautiful. And
yeah,
let's talk. Actually, let's just bring it back to the reality with like, will Firouzja get a shot at the title? Will he break 2,800? Great for the fans. Great questions, dude. Great questions. And Firouzja's got his own challenges as a young kid living in a foreign country and yada, yada. I'm sure there's loads of temptation all around him. Fantastic story. Fantastic. Yeah. And I don't think it's going to be easy, man. I don't think it's going to be easy. But, and tomorrow's a huge day for him, for both of those guys.
Yeah. But I think Jesse and I would agree. We want to see Firouzja and Caruana play like 8 games in a row. We don't want like one. Yeah. It's going to be a great game. It's a great story, but like if Caruana wins, it could get overblown into like, oh, Firouzja's just a kid. He's not ready or something. And dude might be really good the next game, right? and if Firouzja draws, they're like, he survived the test. He should be world champion next. It's like, no, he just got 1 draw. Like 78% of games are draws at their level, like, so if you're going to have a world championship with all matches, first of all, I would call it like the match, the world match champion as opposed to like the world tournament champion, just like there's rapid and classical and stuff. If you're going to have a world champion who's the world championship of like chess matches, then the candidates need to be matches. And there need to be like a couple matches in a row, at least, quarterfinals, semis, finals, and then a world championship match, and guys like Firouzja need to get tested like 8 games in a row by, Caruana, Dingley Ren, or Nepo, whoever was there, a few years before them.
Absolutely. Just making my point, dude. Making my point, man. Caruana, Firouzja, let's bring it on as a candidates match to see who plays. That's right. That's the kind of thing I want. Yeah. That's what I want.
So we all just want candidates matches back.
Yeah, I want the candidates matches back. That's right.
But make it 1 year, please. 1 year cycle.
No, 1 year, that doesn't give it the gravitas it needs, dude. And as other people are pointing out in chat, if you make it the schedule is too intense for 1 year. There's too many other things going on. It needs at least 2 years.
Yeah. I think it is a tricky question, and 2 years is probably right. But like, if it takes too long, then you've got a situation with the kind of child prodigies coming up now, right? You've got a situation where by the time you're playing the world championship, like the best player didn't get in at the beginning of that cycle, maybe, or, you know, the number 2 or number 3, somebody you'd want to see in those matches, right? So I think 3-4 years becomes like way too long, but a year is just too tight because there has to be other stuff. So I think it ends up being 2, but it is a tricky question.
Yeah, 2 years could work. Yeah.
Yeah, even 1.5 might be possible. I don't know, but it's somewhere in there. But then it's weird, right? Some years you've got a world championship, then 1 year you don't, and then you have it 2 years in a row.
Yeah. Well, all right, guys. I love fighting with you. I love fighting. I love being right too. I love being right too.
I just wish I could convince Jesse of one thing once, and I thought today I had a shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was cool.
Okay, guys. Cool. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, as always, guys, thanks for following the podcast. Please make sure to review and subscribe and share it with your friends as well. We're going to be, trying to do these very frequently moving forward, at least once a week. So, yeah.
And one last thing. Last thing.
Oh, God.
Please drop a comment on the video when it's recorded, or the podcast when it's recorded. Drop a comment telling Kostya and Jesse you love my cycle and that's what we should have. That's going to help our algorithm.
Yeah, no, let us know what you think. Yeah, even
if
you disagree with multiple points that we made, maybe write 3 comments where you disagree with everything that David said. One for me. Feed the algorithm.
And also,
guys.
If you have a suggestion about what we should cover next too, we're always looking for new ideas. Yeah,
absolutely. Alrighty, okay, we'll cut there.